it's kind of like trying to push a rope. I mean, it doesn't work. You can't. People can see through it, especially the younger generation now with the internet, and they're able to fact check things really quickly. And when they talk about the horses in the Book of Mormon, and you say, well, a horse was really a taper, that's a big red flag, right? When you talk about the Mayan civilization or other civilizations in Central America, and their civilization time frames don't even closely in any way actually align with the time frames in the Book of Mormon, that's a red flag.
Right.
When they talk about having wheat and grapes and barley and so forth in the Book of Mormon, and none of those things even grow in Central America, that's a red flag. So they've seen this, and because of the promotion of this throughout the church through CES primarily, it's really led a lot of people to say, well, gosh, what else? What else is this is make believe? We can't. It's not verifiable. I mean, yeah. Why would he not be shouting that from the rooftop, saying, hallelujah? This is what I've been wanting to tell you guys. I've been trying to tell you that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America, and for this and this and this reasons, right? And here we have a New York Times best-selling book that's talking all about the book, the Book of Mormon lands. But instead, he said that the incidents of travel in Central America are the most accurate that he's seen of that land. Well, wouldn't that kind of displace the Book of Mormon as being the most accurate of the lands of the Book of Mormon if that was actually that land? So yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that it doesn't make any sense that he would think that book was more accurate than the Book of Mormon if you're talking about the same land.
He's like saying, "Oh, that's nice. This is cool." Anyway, back to what I was doing.
Basically saying, "Yeah, this is nice, but it's a great history of that place,
right?
Not the history of the Book of Mormon,
right?
And it turns out he ended up giving the books away to the Nauvoo Library.
All right, folks, let's get back to where the Mesoamerica theory came from. And here's Rod.
All right, Troy. That was quite a...
My audience they like my humor. If you watch my videos, I have a lot of little bits where I change my voice and I do all kinds of funny stuff. So they're used to the humor. Okay.
Well, good. Well, okay. So where did the idea that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America, where did that even stem from? When you have Joseph Smith doing the self accounts and all of these other things with the Lord saying send missionaries to the Lamanites, and they go to New York, Ohio, and Missouri, and so forth, and then all of a sudden we have this idea taught for the last 100 years or so that the Book of Mormon happened down in Guatemala and southern Mexico, and that actually the research that I'm referencing here is just it's fabulous research that done by primarily by Jonathan Neville. Now, prior to that, though, before I really even met Jonathan Neville, I did my first DVD set. It's called Book of Mormon Evidence number 1, and then there's a number 2 set. And I went into a great amount of detail because I really wanted to find out what Joseph Smith really did know, or what he didn't know about the Book of Mormon and its geography. And so in doing so, I started looking up all of the references to Joseph Smith and anything that he was talking about in regard to the geography of the Book of Mormon. And I also started studying a lot of the ideas. Where did this whole idea come from? And according to the Mesoamerica scholars and people who've been promoting the Mesoamerican theory for a number of years. So Joseph Smith, while he had several different things that indicated a North American setting, but people said, but later on, when some articles in the Times and Seasons came out there in Nauvoo, Joseph Smith was beginning to change his views on the matter. In other words, that he wasn't really quite sure where the Book of Mormon actually took place, but he kind of felt that originally he thought it was maybe in North America, but then later on he was changing his ideas. And so I contacted some of these and read more information and so forth about where the idea of the Book of Mormon happening in Central America actually came from, and there was several different things that came up. One of them was a a, a, a little piece of writing that was put into what's called the Bernheisel manuscript. So I actually went in and did some research on that Bernheisel manuscript and that Royal Skousen and some of the things that he's talked about, some of that. Um, in that it said that the Book of Mormon, he talked about Lehi landing around well, basically the Isthmus of Darien. Um, but he said about 30 degrees south parallel, and excuse me, it was in Chile. So he said that Lehi landed around Chile, 30 degrees south parallel. Talking about the parallel.
And what year is this guy writing this stuff?
Well, John Bernheisel was he was a contemporary of Joseph Smith.
Okay, so it's around 1840, maybe
1830s, 1840s, right around.
Okay.
It was when during the Nauvoo period, so it was towards the end of it. So it's probably in the 40s.
What's his last name again? I'm writing it down.
Bernheisel. And so people would point to that and say, well, see, Joseph Smith said, that because it was in the Bernheisel manuscript, and what John Bernheisel was doing is after Joseph had been killed, or I should say actually assassinated because he was president. After his assassination happened, John Bernheisel asked Emma if he could take the notes that Joseph Smith was then currently working on for the inspired version of the Bible, and if he could basically make a copy of those notes. And in the notes, he writes he has this little piece was there. So I actually contacted the church history department and said, so any handwriting analysis ever been done as to who wrote the notes? The church has the original Bernheisel manuscript letter.
Okay. So Bernheisel's just a member of the church. He's not an apostle. He's not.
Well, Bernheisel was a bishop of the church actually up in New York.
Okay.
We're going to talk about him a little bit more later on when we start talking about the smoking gun of Book of Mormon geography.
Well, and let me just say this real quick. Let me get this out of the way so I can sit back and listen. But yeah, because you'll hear people say, and I can't remember where I've heard it, that Joseph Smith was, like you said, he didn't have a stance on Book of Mormon geography, which you're saying is not true. And other scholars will say today that he was okay with the Mesoamerica theory. He was like, that's interesting. Maybe that's where they were, but that's not entirely accurate.
Right. And so I actually have a whole, 2-hour presentation that I did on I call it actually, surprisingly enough, Joseph Knew.
Oh, yeah.
And yeah, maybe I should really actually copyright that. But anyway,
you got royalties coming to your
So in my first DVD set, I had about a 2-hour part of it that's talking about Joseph Knew, and I cover all of this in that first DVD.
Okay.
Basically, so the Bernheisel manuscript has this little thing about Lehi landing in Chile, 30 degrees south parallel. Anyway, so I actually had actually a friend actually contacted the church history department and said, so do we know what that, because it was, you had John Bernheisel's writing, which is distinctive enough that you could actually tell which was his writing. And then this part about the landing in Chile, 30 degrees south parallel, was actually in a different handwriting. And it turns out it was W.W. Phelps. No, it was McClellan. William McClellan. It was his handwriting, actually, that part about Chile was in. Of course, that means that, number one, it wasn't from Joseph Smith. It wasn't from John Bernheisel either. It wasn't part of Joseph Smith's inspired version of the Bible. And it was basically just McClellan's, personal ideas.
So you're saying that John Bernheisel is a theory that was circulating these days?
Yeah. Yes.
That it was John Bernheisel that put these in a book, right?
So I kind of jumped into the middle of the story there.
Okay, sure.
Let's go back all the way to the very beginning origins. As far as we can tell, the earliest people talking about the Book of Mormon happening in Central or Mesoamerica. And that actually, we lovingly call this the smoking gun of Book of Mormon geography, because it has a lot to do with this guy by the name of Benjamin, and his last name is Winchester.
Yeah, Benjamin Winchester.
Smoking gun. If you want to know all about this, and with all the referencing, going back to all the historical documentation, I'd highly recommend that you take a look at and read Jonathan Neville's book,
Yes.
The Lost City of Zarahemla.
The Lost City. I have it on Kindle, and that's my next book I'm going to read.
It is fabulous. The research that Jonathan Neville did is just absolutely nothing short of it was just spectacular, just amazing stuff. In fact, I understand he's probably too humble to ever mention this, but there was a couple of people at the church history department that said it's one of the most significant findings in church history that's been brought up in the last 50 years.
He's told me some stuff off camera, which I'm not going to get into, and everyone's probably like, "What?" No, yeah. That's all I'm going to say is, yeah, you're right.
This is significant stuff.
And I don't want to get off the topic, but later, will you tell me how you guys met and what? Because he says he had ideas like this before he even met you, and he thought it was just crazy when he met you that you guys were like, I don't know, like beans and rice, like peas and carrots, peas and carrots.
Well, let me cover that part first, because that might be important to understand before we kind of get into this. So Jonathan Neville is an individual that he has. And it's kind of funny because certain scholars, apologists in the church, when I started doing my research, they kind of just blew me off because I don't, I'm not a PhD, I'm not a doctorate, I don't work at BYU, that kind of stuff, and so it's kind of easy to blow me off as far as that. Well, he's just kind of an ignorant, he just doesn't really know. He's just not really well educated, and he's not a scholar, so we can kind of just ignore what he says.
That usually just comes from scholars. It doesn't come from us. We know who the real smart people are. But anyway, I mean, they're scholars. Yes,
if you're a scholar, you're going to agree with us because we're scholars, right?
Well, scholarship gives us things, right? But we're quasi scholars. We're neo scholars. We're just like neo apologists. Anyway.
Well, that's why I call myself an expert and not a scholar, because I have not gone through the schooling that's kind of part and parcel to being a quote unquote a scholar. But you can be an expert on something without being a scholar necessarily. Right. In fact, a lot of humankind's greatest achievements and greatest inventions were done by people outside of the field that they were in. Because they're able to see things without having the lens of the scholarly view that was actually, in some cases, can hold people back too. So, but with Jonathan Neville, the difference is that he is actually a scholar. Okay, so he's a Juris Doctorate. He's an attorney, lawyer, a legal expert or legal scholar. In fact, he's written books on legal stuff that are still used to this day. He worked with the Supreme Court of New Mexico. He was a JAG attorney. I mean, so this is a guy who they can't just say, well, he's just an ignorant, bumpkin.
Right. Even Richard Bushman has come to him and
they have to acknowledge that, and they can't just dismiss him like they have been able to. At least they attempted to dismiss me. The only thing is I'm a little too tenacious, so they haven't been able to just dismiss me and have me go away, because I haven't gone away. I've just done my thing and let people.
You're like the Energizer Bunny, man. I mean, Rod's not going to stop. He's just going to keep going and going and going.
especially when it affects so many people's faith. These things with the Central America theory have caused untold damage to the church and people's faith. And not because they're doing it on purpose or anything like that, but
Right.
just if you have something and it doesn't match up and people see it, but you still try to push it, it's kind of like trying to push a rope. I mean, it doesn't work. You can't. People can see through it, especially the younger generation now with the internet, and they're able to to fact check things really quickly. And when they talk about the horses in the Book of Mormon, and you say, well, a horse was really a taper, that's a big red flag, right? When you talk about the Mayan civilization or other civilizations in Central America, and their civilization time frames don't even closely in any way actually align with the time frames in the Book of Mormon, that's a red flag.
Right.
When they talk about having wheat and grapes and barley and so forth in the Book of Mormon, and none of those things even grow in Central America, that's a red flag. So they've seen this, and because of the promotion of this throughout the church through CES primarily, it's really led a lot of people to say, well, gosh, what else? What else is this is make believe. We can't. It's not verifiable.
Right.
So that's been a problem. So anyway,
Yeah.
okay. So where were we?
So we're at okay. So here's where we are. We have Scott. Well, yeah, and we have scholars believing that Bernheisel made references to Mesoamerica, but really it's William McClellan's handwriting. And now we're talking about how Benjamin Winchester ties into all this.
So there were several other things that were talked about. There was a letter that was understood to be from John Taylor to Joseph Smith, thanking him for some books and so forth, which we're going to talk about here. So let's just go back to the very earliest references. So let's go back to the smoking gun, which is Benjamin Winchester. So Benjamin Winchester was a lad actually at the time. He was probably 16 or 17 years old when he and his father participated in the march that went from Ohio down to Missouri. So basically oh, I don't know why it's escaping me, but basically the
Zion's camp. Yeah.
Zion's Camp March. His dad was quite an actual was a friend of Joseph Smith. In fact, they oftentimes would even sleep in the same room or whatever. While they're on these when they're staying over at Joseph Smith would come over and actually stay at their home. So he knew the prophet Joseph Smith on a personal level. He and his family, they were quite close. So he's the youngest guy in Zion's camp, apparently, at 16 years old. By the time he is about 17 or 18 years old, he was actually called to go on a mission over to Europe. And so he was one of the first missionaries over there. He was an absolute had missionary zeal. In fact, I think by accounts that he baptized over 200 people in his lifetime into the church. So he was quite a zealous guy. And bottom line is that he after he came back early from his mission in Europe, and I think it was in England, and then he ended up in Philadelphia, and there he began a newspaper, and I'm trying to remember what it was called, but anyways, but he started like a newspaper to he saw the effect that it had in Europe of doing these tracts where they would they would get a piece of they would have they put up a notice that there's going to be a preacher coming to speak at a certain place and time, and they put these notices out, and people would come to him, and then they would preach to him, right? Anyway, so he was putting together this newspaper, and he needed to get subscribers for it so he could actually make enough money to buy the printing and whatever that he needed. And so he began this newspaper, but unfortunately it wasn't working too well. But right just about the same time, there was these two guys by the name of Stevens and Catherwood that were going around the United States doing presentations on what they had found as they had gone down to Central America. And Catherwood, I think it was a wood carver, so he actually made these wood carvings of these places in Central America, So he had a book that actually had kind of the first pictures in it, and it actually became the very first ever New York Times bestseller. In fact, the term New York Times bestselling book actually came from the sales of this 2-volume set of books by Stevens and Catherwood.
Okay.
And so they were going out doing a book promotion around the area, and they happened to come into Philadelphia. John Bernheisel or Benjamin, Benjamin Winchester actually got wind of this, and he actually went to him. At the time when he went to a couple of these presentations, apparently, and at the same time, he had gotten involved with a discussion, if you will, or actually it was a debate. It was a series of debates that had been set up between he and some other evangelical Christians, essentially that he was doing very well with gaining converts to the gospel in these debates. But the only thing about it is that these debates they got down to the point where they asked him. He said, "Well, who are these Nephites? Who are these people that your Book of Mormon claims to be the people? Are they these Indians? These ignorant savages, as they were being called at the time?" And he didn't really have a good answer to that. So who built the cities, the roads, had the written language? That doesn't sound like these Native Americans that we know around here, because we are calling them ignorant savages.
Right.
Now, a little bit about where that ignorant savages word came from actually also stems from Joseph Smith's day. And there were three guys who were highly influential in establishing the Smithsonian. They actually was with the Bureau of Ethnology. This is research that I'm going to reference right now. Is actually research that's been done by Stephen Smoot. He's done some fantastic research involving the lost civilizations of North America.
Okay.
And anyway, so he so this is so there was John Wesley Powell, Ephraim George Squires, and Lewis Henry Morgan. Now, Ephraim George Squires had been sent out to survey a lot of these mounds that we've been talking about, right? And Ephraim George Squires was involved with a couple of books about that. In fact, the very first book on these mounds was a book that was written. It was actually done by the Smithsonian, called about the Mississippi River Valley. I've got copies of it here, but it's talking about the ancient history of the Mississippi River Valley, and they talk about these mounds. And Ephraim George Squires was involved with that. Anyway, so it turns out when we were doing a documentary film called The Lost Civilizations of North America, which again I'd highly recommend seeing that. It's actually not an LDS based documentary. It's actually just a regular historical documentary. But
when you send me your links, would you send me that link as well? Okay.
Yeah, and we have copies of that on DVD, but I think that we need to put that up on our streaming website at bookofmormonevidence.org.
Okay.
We have our streaming website there. Anyway, so in doing the Lost Civilizations of North America, we found out something really significant, and that is that John Wesley Powell, a lot of people know him because of Lake Powell in Utah is named after him. Okay. And everybody kind of knows about he lost his arm. He did a expedition down the Colorado River through the Grand Canyon at one point in time, and anyway, so he had the ear of every president of the United States from his day on, during his lifetime. But there's another guy by the name of Lewis Henry Morgan. Now, Lewis Henry Morgan also was working with Powell and Squire to form a branch of the Smithsonian to start archaeology as an actual science. There was no such thing as archaeology per se back at that time. They began to establish the archaeological protocols and so forth. How do you do archaeological research? Okay. Anyway, so Lewis Henry Morgan was an interesting guy. He wrote a book called Ancient Societies. And he also had a lot of correspondence between he and another contemporary of Joseph Smith, which a lot of people don't realize. But have you ever heard of a guy by the name of Charles Darwin?
Yes.
Yeah, he was also a contemporary of Joseph Smith and all these guys, and he had several correspondences between himself and Charles Darwin, and he began to believe in the idea of humans coming from lower life forms. Okay,
Interesting.
so he was enamored with that idea of humans coming literally from apes, and he came up with kind of the same idea that Charles Darwin did, that if we came from apes and apes are primarily black basically, then the more white you are, the farther you have evolved away from the apes.
Oh, okay.
So it was incredibly racist, right? Okay.
Right. Right.
But this is part of evolution. This is one of the things of evolution that people don't want to talk about. But it's,
well, that's what people believed. Yeah.
By Black African people were considered to be really even a subhuman.
Right. Right. Right.
And Native Americans, because of their darker skin color, were also considered to be not quite 100% human. And that's why they could be denied access to voting or to own land and those kinds of things. So where did that all come from? Part of that came from this Lewis Henry Morgan, and because of his love of the theory of evolution and his correspondences with Charles Darwin, he wrote this book called Ancient Societies, in which he actually establishes a hierarchy. He says that first you start off as ignorant savages, and you move up to barbarism and up to civilization. And the barbarism part is, people of faith, basically, are the barbarous peoples. And then when you move up to civilization, when we basically no longer need to rely on God and that kind of thing. And then he was the one that actually coined the term ignorant savages and actually applied that to the Native Americans that were living in the areas back there. And so that's where this ignorant savage term comes from. A lot of people don't know that history, but that's where it stemmed from, is his book. Well, that book was coming out, and about in that same kind of time frame as Joseph Smith's lifetime and that general time frame there. And there was a lot of conversation going on in the United States about about who these people were and where did they come from, and were they part of the Lost 10 Tribes, or what was the deal with them. And so there was a lot of that kind of conversation.
Right. You've got books like Manuscript Found, and well, not that one, but View of the Hebrew. That wasn't an uncommon. That was gaining popularity. That Israelites possibly came over here. Yeah.
Right, and they took a look at these huge mounds, and this takes a massive amount of human labor and effort, and also it shows a degree of division of labor. It also has some centralization of the culture. They must have some kind of a hierarchical structure in there, and all that kind of stuff. So that's all was playing into this whole thing. It turns out then here we have Joseph Smith making the claim of finding the ancient history of these people and how they had cities and roads and buildings, and they had a written language, and it was basically Hebrew language, and so that all talked of a highly advanced civilization. And yet, when they looked around at the Native Americans, they looked at them as being a bunch of hunter gatherers. They were kind of just berry and nut hunters. That they had never achieved anything close to what they considered to be civilization. Mm-hmm. And so they're going, so who's the Book of Mormon about then? Because these Native Americans, they're all just ignorant savages. Right. What they don't realize is that the Native American peoples had achieved massive greatness way back, but after the first European settlers came to America, and brought with them diseases for which the Native Americans had no natural immunity, they died like flies. I mean, it's estimated that between 85 and 90% of the populations that were here in America died as a result of the smallpox and the diphtheria and other diseases that basically were brought here by the European explorers and just decimated their populations. And anytime you have, the bottom line is that your civilization collapses when you lose a large part of the population, because you lose your division of labor, basically your specialization of labor. So I mean, I give people the example: what would happen if tomorrow morning 80% of Americans woke up dead? You know,
Right. Yeah.
how long
No,
would
no
that take
doubt.
before it would affect our civilization, our culture?
Right.
You know, and all of a sudden you don't have truck drivers showing up in the morning. All of a sudden the grid doesn't have the people to operate that, and the food stops flowing, and the farmers stop. You know, everything just comes to a grinding halt. And when that does, then you have to do what actually works at that point in time, which is basically you go back to hunter gathering. You go back to subsistence farming. This is what the Native Americans were found doing after the collapse of their populations. And yet people thought that that's how they always had been. You know,
Right.
that's not how they'd always been. They were one of the most advanced peoples on the planet prior to their depopulation.
Well, it's just like the Incas and the all the Peruvians and the all the Aztecs, the Mayans, the Toltecs, and there's tribes that descended from those great civilizations. So it does happen. So you've got Lewis Henry Morgan, and he knows these two guys that bring this Central American narrative to.
Yeah. Well, what we found is fascinating is we did a little bit more research into Ephraim George Squires and Lewis Henry Morgan, excuse me, and Powell. It turns out, and most people don't know this, but this was just fascinating information. So both of them had fathers who were Methodist ministers.
Okay.
And what was really fascinating is they were not just were they Methodist ministers, but they were Methodist ministers in a place called Palmyra, New York.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So what is the possibility that a Methodist minister or two of them in Palmyra, New York in 1830 would not have known about this upstart young prophet by the name of Joe Smith, and his gold Bible, right?
Right.
Clearly they knew about the claims of the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith and what he was talking about with that stuff, and they passed it on to their sons, okay, and they knew that the Book of Mormon talked about these massive civilizations and so forth. So they knew that if they could use Manifest Destiny doctrine, American Manifest Destiny doctrine, basically to say that the Native Americans had never achieved civilization, not only would it make it possible then to dismiss the Book of Mormon, okay, which talks about a massive, a highly advanced civilization, but also would make it possible to remove the Indians from their lands by force because they were subhuman. They had never achieved civilization.
Okay, so let me get this straight. The Morgan and what was his name? Powell?
Powell. Yeah, John Wesley Powell.
Okay. Who are the other two guys?
John Wesley Powell, Ephraim George Squires.
Okay, we've got the two guys that were peddling the Central America thing.
They weren't peddling the Central American thing per se. What they were doing is they were basically saying that the Native Americans that were in the area today, in their time frame, had never achieved anything close to civilization, and the Book of Mormon talks about people who were highly civilized. So
what I'm saying is I'm getting two names. I'm getting the names confused with. Okay, so Lewis Henry Morgan and Powell, those aren't the same. Morgan knew the other two guys, right?
Yeah, they were all together in establishing the Bureau of Ethnology, which later became the Smithsonian.
Gotcha. That's what I was. Okay, I see what's going on now.
So that kind of gives you a little bit more of a backdrop as to what's going on here. So now let's go back to Benjamin Winchester.
Okay.
Benjamin Winchester's in Philadelphia. Catherwood and Stevens are out promoting their book set about Central America, and at the same time, Benjamin Winchester is having these debates going on there in Philadelphia with these evangelicals, and the evangelicals are saying, who's the Book of Mormon about? These ignorant savages that are being talked about in their New York Times best-selling book of their day, coming out from there. And when Winchester's like, well, and then he thought, oh my goodness, Stevens and Catherwood just have this brand new book out about Central America. If I can connect the Book of Mormon with this best-selling New York Times book about a highly advanced civilization down in Central America, guess what? We got a match made in heaven.
Right.
It's fantastic. And so he started using the Stevens and Catherwood's books.
That's who I was thinking of, Stevens and Catherwood. I was trying to remember the other two guys. So Lewis Henry Morgan.
There's a lot of actors in this particular play.
Right.
Okay.
Stevens and Catherwood. That's who were the peddlers. They weren't peddlers, but they were the guys that wrote.
Yeah, they were writing. They were going out promoting their book.
That's what I mean. They're out selling their book. So so Morgan.
They didn't care about the Book of Mormon. They were just talking about this really cool, hidden cities and so forth down in Central America, and they were bringing that to light to the American public. Powell was the guy that was the John Wesley Powell. He's quite well known. He's kind of considered like the father of national park systems and so forth.
Okay, but Powell and Morgan had the minister fathers.
Yes, their
okay.
fathers were Methodist ministers. Yeah.
Oh, was it Benjamin?
Not Morgan. That was actually Squire and.
Okay, I've got it now. I wrote it all down, and I'm trying. Sorry, I'll probably edit that part out
because
it can make confusing. That's why if you get the book, the last
right. That's why I'm writing them all down. But it was Benjamin Winchester's the one that's getting the idea for the Central America.
Yeah. So Winchester, he goes to what Stevens and Catherwood were doing with this promotion of this book in Central America. He sees the highly advanced civilizations that are ancient.
Okay.
I'm going to link up the Book of Mormon with this ancient civilization down in Central America. And
brilliant idea. He has
the argument in his favor now as he's doing these debates with these evangelical Christians in Philadelphia. And he starts to actually, he's really winning over a lot of people. A lot of converts are coming into the church there. And he thinks that the answer to the Book of Mormon question about who they were is these people that they're being talked about by this New York Times bestselling book. So you see how the connection there can.
Yes.
Anyway, so he becomes pretty enamored with his whole idea. And then it turns out that John Bernheisel, living up in New York, he had a visitor by the name of Wilford Woodruff. So Wilford Woodruff had been sent to Europe as well on a mission, and he was coming back from this mission, and he stopped in New York and he stayed with John Bernheisel while he was there. John Bernheisel was a bishop there in New York. And it turns out that they met, and it turns out that John Bernheisel also had been quite enamored with this instance of travel in Central America by Catherwood and Stevens, and so he ended up giving Wilford Woodruff a copy of the books. Again, it's a 2-volume set. Okay, and so then what happened was that Wilford Woodruff then took those books and we're not 100% sure if he gave them to Wilford Woodruff or if he gave them to Joseph Smith and then had Wilford Woodruff be the delivery person for that.
Okay.
It's probably the latter. I think that John Bernheisel wanted to get these books to Joseph Smith as further evidence of the Book of Mormon's historicity.
Okay.
So Wilford Woodruff took the books, and while he was on the Erie Canal getting back to Nauvoo, he read them. I've actually pulled his actual journal, which is actually in the BYU library, and in the special collections department. I actually pulled his journal and read his own personal handwriting as he was going down the canal there. Okay, and then he became quite enamored also with these two books. Okay. And he wanted to get these to Joseph Smith. So he brought them to Joseph Smith, which now from Jonathan Neville's research, turns out that Joseph Smith acknowledged that he got the books. He actually had John Taylor write a thank you note to Bernheisel, thanking him for giving him the books. And he said that these books are the most. I have all the quotes and so forth in my full presentation, but he said these books are the most enlightening about the area that they're from. Okay. If Joseph Smith believed that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America, why would he think that these that this was the most, that the incident of travel in Central America was the most accurate as far as the Book of Mormon is concerned? Wouldn't the Book of Mormon be the most accurate? Is what I'm saying.
Can I say something? Can I answer Professor Rod Meldrum? No. He would have been all over the place with this. He probably would have written paragraphs about this. He probably would have said a lot more about this is the place of the Book of Mormon. This is the narrow neck of land. This is this. This is that. This is Zarahemla. These are Rameumptums. These are this is, these are the Lamanites. This is where all the wars in the Book of Mormon happened. He would have been, this is revolutionary. This is paramount. This is miraculous.
I mean, yeah. Why would he not be shouting that from the rooftop, saying, hallelujah. This is what I've been wanting to tell you guys. I've been trying to tell you that the Book of Mormon happened in Central America, and for this and this and this reasons, right? And here we have a New York Times best-selling book that's talking all about the book, the Book of Mormon lands. But instead, he said that the incidents of travel in Central America are the most accurate that he's seen of that land. Well, wouldn't that kind of displace the Book of Mormon as being the most accurate of the lands of the Book of Mormon if that was actually that land? So yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that it doesn't make any sense that he would think that book was more accurate than the Book of Mormon if you're talking about the same land.
He's like saying, "Oh, that's nice. This is cool." Anyway, back to what I was doing.
Basically saying, "Yeah, this is nice, but it's a great history of that place,
right?
Not the history of the Book of Mormon."
Right.
And it turns out he ended up giving the books away to the Nauvoo Library, and we have actually Jonathan has found the evidence that he ended up giving a lot of his books to the Nauvoo Library. The ones that he didn't want to keep, he gave to the library. An Instance of Travel in Central America by John Lloyd Stevens and Catherwood was two of the books that he donated to the Nauvoo Library. So. That's what Joseph Smith thought about the Instance of Travel in Central America by John Lloyd Stevens, which is the primary book that the Mesoamerica theorists use as their primary thing that Joseph Smith loved the Central America stuff. Well, let's go back to Benjamin Winchester.
Yeah, and I was just going to say real quick that that's probably why scholars run with the idea that, Joseph didn't know either.
Right.
Because that's how they explain away his lack of enthusiasm for these books.
Yeah, we're going to get into that little bit next, because what happens next is real important.
Okay.
So basically, Benjamin Winchester sees the success that's going on with the Millennial Star and some of the earliest newspapers, news rags, if you will, of the church that Joseph Smith was involved with, and then they came up with the Times and Seasons, right? And so Benjamin Winchester is doing a similar kind of a situation over there in Philadelphia, but he's going broke in the process. He's not getting enough subscribers to be able to continue on with that. And then he finds out through the grapevine somehow that Joseph Smith's little brother, I believe it was Samuel Smith, had passed away while they was working on the Times and Seasons. Okay, the Times and Seasons was on the corner of Bain Street and I can't remember the other one, but anyway, it's and the basement of that structure is still there in Nauvoo, uncovered, and they know where it was and so forth. But working on the Times and Seasons was kind of a dark, dank. It was cold in that basement. It was wet. It was damp. It was moldy. And anyway, long story short is that Joseph Smith's brother died, and the word got out that he had passed away. and he was working on the times and seasons. So Benjamin Winchester took the opportunity to say, he wrote a letter, which is still extant. The original letter still exists, where he basically, he says, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear about your loss there, Joseph, and who can possibly replace your brother on the times and seasons? And I says, but I have my, my publication that I'm doing over here in Philadelphia. Okay. And he says, he kind of hints that he would like to come and help with that. Well, about a month later, he shows up in Nauvoo, and he's going to help with the times and seasons, which he does. So Joseph Smith's little brother William, as well as Joseph, and there were others who were involved with the times and seasons as well. Wilford Woodruff and John Taylor also
Right.
were involved. And so then all of a sudden, when Benjamin Winchester shows up in Nauvoo and with the times and seasons, there's a couple of articles that come out in the times and seasons that are explicitly are talking about Central America and even specifically quoting directly from the Institute of Travel in Central America by John Lloyd Stephens and Catherwood. Okay. So here in the times and seasons are direct quotes from the Central America book that was done. And when Joseph Smith got wind of it, he was not happy.
Really? That's journalized. That's
yeah. And in fact, it's actually even published in the Times and Seasons that he was Benjamin Winchester was given such a severe reprimand that they actually published it in the Times and Seasons that Benjamin Winchester is hereby silenced from any further stuff going, as far as any more of his materials going out there to the church.
So what do the scholars today say about that?
Well, most of them didn't know about it until Jonathan Neville. Well, I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that they didn't know about it,
or they just pretended.
But yeah, you can actually look it up right at the Times and Seasons, and you can see where. I mean, how would it be to have somebody like in the Ensign,
right?
By all the 12, to be he's hereby silenced, right? So he kind of repents in sackcloth and ashes, and he's kind of like he's very repentant. He goes back to work on the Times and Seasons. There's a lot of stuff I'm having to leave out here because it would be hours and hours if we put all the details in.
Sure.
Okay, but bottom line is so he is censured, and for several months he doesn't do it again. But then there's a time when somebody takes a pot shot at Governor Lilburn Boggs, and he fingers Joseph Smith as probably the most likely perpetrator of his. Okay. And so Joseph Smith ends up going into hiding for a period of time. And during the time when he was in hiding, there were the Times and Seasons is still having to publish something, right? Because they have subscribers who have paid to get something from the in the Times and Seasons on a bi-weekly basis. I think it was
right.
a bi-monthly basis. And they were and Joseph wasn't even there. I mean, he was in and around Nauvoo, but he was in hiding. He clearly wasn't writing and editing and setting type and so forth. The Times and Seasons, that was his brother William and Benjamin Winchester that was doing that at the time. And I wish I could go into have more detail about going into the wild.
Well, I think what I'll do is I'm going to talk tomorrow. I have Jonathan on.
Is that right? Yeah.
So maybe I'll ask him go into more detail about this, about the Times and Seasons, and
I could go into the details. I actually had the details on the Times and Seasons stuff even before I met Jonathan. It was in that first DVD set that I did before I met Jonathan, but he brought a lot more of the background information out that I didn't have necessarily there. But even the way that these were taught, when Joseph Smith would write, he would write typically in first person, singular. So he would say I and me, and I did this, I thought that, that kind of thing.
Right.
Articles that were written about promoting the Central American idea were written as we. They were not first person. They were third person, and they were plural. So as we and us, we think that Cadigua is the most likely place to be Zarahemla and that kind of stuff, right? So it's total speculation, and everybody thought it was coming from Joseph Smith because it was in the Times and Seasons, and at the bottom of each page of the Times and Seasons, it said at the end of each issue of the Times and Seasons that the Times and Seasons is edited blah 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 by Joseph Smith Jr. the prophet, kind of thing. And that was like a plate that would be put on the bottom. There's a word for it. I can't remember what the word is, but basically, it was like the boilerplate of the Times and Seasons. It was in every issue the same exact thing. So they would make that up one time. So when they would do the printing, they didn't have to remake it every time, right? Okay, so these articles are not even written in Joseph Smith's thing. When Joseph Smith found out about it, then he got so upset that he actually published an article in the Times and Seasons, said that I am only going to be responsible for the stuff that has my signature on it henceforward, because he knew that there was articles that were being put into the Times and Seasons that he didn't write or edit, and he wanted to make sure that people knew when it was him writing and when it was somebody else writing.
Okay.
He actually published in the Times and Seasons that I will be responsible only for those things which have my signature on it in the Times and Seasons, and most of these were signed ED for editor. Okay, now Joseph Smith is clearly an editor, but so was John Taylor and so was Wilford Woodruff, and also the others, William and so forth. So basically, when it has ED on it, you don't know which one of them it is, or even if it's Joseph Smith at all. And all of these articles in Central America promoting the Central America stuff were written under the ED name at the bottom of it. But the ones that were Joseph Smith is actually signed by Joseph Smith. Okay, so then what happened was so in the same time frame, so we have John Page, who was one of the 12 apostles.
Okay.
He came out to meet with Winchester before he left Philadelphia. He actually went to Philadelphia and met with Benjamin Winchester, and Benjamin Winchester convinced John Page that the Incidents of Travel in Central America by Stevens and Catherwood was in fact the backup of the Book of Mormon account, and it was all about Central America. And he began to convince John Page. It's kind of funny because then John Page came back to Nauvoo, and he tried to also talk Joseph Smith into it, and Joseph Smith wasn't buying that either. Okay, but the two of them ended up becoming apostates, right?
Wow.
And when Brigham Young took over the leadership of the church, both of them apostatized, both of them left, and both of them continued to promote their Central American theories to the offshoots of the mainstream church. Okay, they were so they were so proud of themselves for making the connections with Central America that they actually ended up ultimately, and Jonathan can tell you a little bit more of that, but that's tomorrow. But they actually ended up suing each other over who was going to get credit for the Mesoamerican theory.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
But anyway, there's so much to this story. It's a beautiful thing. Again, I want to encourage everybody to get a copy if you want to know the details and where all the historical information is about this. Just get a hold of Jonathan Neville's book. It's called the Lost City of Zarahemla. Okay, and it goes into all the details. It's fully referenced. You can check out every one of the references and what was going on there.
Yeah. We actually have been talking about it. It's something my subscribers are familiar with.
I will also. I need to put my original research on there, because I came to the conclusion that these articles in the Times and Seasons were in fact not written by Joseph Smith. I didn't know who had written them, but I knew it wasn't written in the same linguistic style that Joseph Smith used. So what ended up happening is, so that after he kind of repented for a little bit, Benjamin Winchester went back again while Joseph Smith was in hiding this time, and he published again more articles about Mesoamerica, and again quoted from the Incidents of Travel in Central America, and this time the prophet was so teed off by the whole thing that he he shut down the Times and Seasons. There's actually one of the, it was a 2 week, twice a month. It was a bi-monthly newspaper, basically, right? And he actually shut it down, and he fired Benjamin Winchester, and I believe he also fired his brother William from doing the Times and Seasons, because he was colluding with Benjamin Winchester as well, and putting these articles in. And I mean, that kind of tells you what he thought about these articles.
Yeah.
Joseph Smith did not approve of them. He did not write them. And when they came out, he was probably as shocked as everyone else was when they came out with these articles, and he took action to dismiss him. However, he never came out with a direct refutation of the articles. And there's some reasons that Jonathan Neville can talk to you a little bit more about that maybe tomorrow when you have the interview with him.
Mm-hmm.
But as I understand it, some of the reason was it had to do with the Wasp, which is a news rag that was being put out also by William. And of course, a wasp is known primarily for stinging people.
Right.
So William was going after some of the other newspapers in the region there, with some pretty highly attacking articles and so forth. And of course, William and Joseph they didn't get along that well.
Yeah.
In many
right.
They got in a fist fight to the point where I think it was William that actually broke one of the teeth of Joseph Smith off.
Dang.
Then he had a little chipped tooth there that would whistle when, or no, let's see.
Yeah, yeah. And he also had a scar on his lip too.
Yeah.
I think that was from that fight. Yeah.
But anyway, so I may have missed a few details. It's probably been.
No, it's okay. We're gonna get into this more. I'm gonna rehash this with Jonathan, and maybe later with you again sometime.
But as it turns out, if you kind of boil it all down into a nutshell, basically, it turns out that the whole Mesoamerican theory came from really 2 or 3 guys who were all apostates.
Wow.
And they got it into the Community of Christ, which is now the Community of Christ, the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They were highly influenced by these 2 guys as well, John Page and Benjamin Winchester. They began that, and then now this is just a little side note here, Troy, that is just interesting. But we've all hopefully most of us have seen the film about the fighting preacher, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Willard Bean. Well, Willard Bean was called to go back to kind of reestablish some relationships with people in the Palmyra, New York area, and of course they hated the Mormons bad, and they were shunned. They wouldn't even let them buy food. They had to go to the next city over before to find food for their family. Wouldn't let them go to school. I mean, all kinds of things. They did everything they could to try to eschew and to discriminate against the Bean family. But ultimately, he ended up winning them over with his athletic prowess and so forth. He had these boxing tournaments and so forth. Anyway, the point I was going to make is that Willard Bean was instrumental in getting the Hill Cumorah for the church, right? I mean, he was the one that found out about made the arrangements to have the church purchase the Hill Cumorah and so forth. Well, when he did, the Community of Christ, which was the reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they also wanted the Hill, but when we beat them to it, they began even more so promoting the idea of Central America and said, see that the Salt Lake Church, they bought the wrong hill. That's not the real Hill Cumorah. The real Hill Cumorah is down in Central America someplace.
Interesting.
And Jonathan can talk to you a little bit more about that.
That's where the 2 Cumorah thing came from.
Well, that's not where it came from, but that was a result of the 2 Cumorah theory, which the 2 Cumorah theory came from the fact that at some point in time, people studying the internal travel distances and time frames of the Book of Mormon, scholars in the church,
right,
kind of figured out because there were some people who believed that Joseph Smith thought that the entire Americas, North and Central and South America, was all the lands of the Book of Mormon, and the Isthmus of basically Panama was the narrow neck of land, and so forth. There's no.
Well, that always made, it's pretty. People are like, yeah, I can go with that. There's the narrow neck of lands. Therefore, case it's all solved. That's it right there. I think that narrow neck of land,
northward, land southward, narrow neck of land in between. It's pretty.
We're good with that.
We're good with that. Moving on.
The only problem is it's thousands and thousands of miles. It's a long way.
And where's all the reformed Egyptian?
Well, that and also the narrow neck of land, though, in the Book of Mormon is described in enough detail that we can eliminate the Panama area as the narrow neck of land, because it says that it could be crossed by a Nephite on foot in a day. Well, nobody's crossing Panama in a day on foot, especially not back in those days when it was almost all swamps. It was just one swamp after the next for about, I think it's about 42 miles across there. Well, who's going to walk 42 miles across swamps in one day?
Yeah.
No, it didn't say that it was the fastest Nephite ever. They said it was for a Nephite, which I'm assuming is an average member of the Nephite society, could cross the narrow neck of land in a day. It also talks about other narrow spaces like the narrow passage and the narrow pass and other narrow places. It turns out that those are not all the same place. There's several different narrow places.
Well, it never really mentions bodies of water being on each side of this narrow neck, right?
Yeah. And that's we have a perfect place for that. That's only 15 miles across, between Lake Michigan and Lake Erie back in the days when they were 50 feet higher and created what's called the Great Black Swamp and the Grand Kankakee Marsh. And those two came within 15 miles of each other, creating a narrow neck of land between the two Great Lakes. In basically eastern Ohio and or I should say, western Ohio and part of Illinois. So kind of east of Chicago,
right?
100 miles east of Chicago. Anyway, that's neither here nor there as far as that's concerned. But that's it is an interesting thing, in talking about just other places like that. I'm always fascinated by the fact that in the Book of Mormon they talked about how there was a place where there was 4 cardinal seas. There was a sea north, sea south, sea east, sea west are mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
And then they talk about these seas, and they said that the where the land bountiful was a place where the sea divides the land. Well, in Central America, the land is dividing the seas.
Right. It's not the other way around.
But it's only in the Great Lakes where you have the land, where the seas are dividing the land up. And also they talked about several times in the Book of Mormon, in Helaman and Alma, they talked about large bodies of water. And they went to the land northward, which was covered by large bodies of water. Well, where is that in Central America?
Right.
You'd have to be talking about the Gulf of Mexico. And that's not bodies plural, that's bodies singular.
Right.
Gulf of Mexico. But there's several Great Lakes, so you have several, meaning plural, large bodies of water involved when they went to land northward, which is, anyway, so, basically, so it's just absolutely fascinating how the Book of Mormon geography works beautifully. The Mesoamerican theory literally came from guys who became apostates. There's no indication that Joseph Smith ever believed in the Central American theory, and kind of the final word on that is I got from a historian, Andrew Ehat. If you read the words of the prophet Joseph Smith, it's the book that he put together. It's not the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith by Joseph Fielding Smith. That actually has quite a number of things in it that are in error, that were not actually from Joseph Smith, that historians have discovered that Joseph Smith didn't teach or preach that particular thing.
Okay.
But Andrew Ehat's book, the words of the prophet Joseph Smith are actually from his written accounts. So I like that as a little more authoritative. Probably the Joseph Smith Papers is the most authoritative as far as that's concerned. I'm so grateful for the Joseph Smith Papers. They've done a tremendous job of putting those things together, and pretty much as unbiased as it can be. There's some bias that I still find occasionally in that, but generally speaking, it's really good stuff. The Joseph Smith Papers project has done a tremendous service to the church, and thankful for Larry Miller and his sweet wife to actually,
Yeah.
Anyway, so back to
yeah, they did. Yeah, I've been reading through them, but now the gospel topics essays, that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other thing. Yeah,
But-
we do talk about that sometimes.
That's
There's some problematic things
There's
in
some
there,
major problems there.
and some of what we're talking about.
There's several other people who, one of them was actually Wilford Woodruff for a while. But what I was going to get to, though, the point that I might need to make is real important. So I've had BYU and other apologetics on the Mesoamerica side of things that said, well, yeah, Joseph Smith, originally, he had those revelations about the Lamanites being in North America, but later he changed his mind and began to believe in Central America, right? I mean, isn't that kind of problematic? If somebody's claiming to have revelation and saying that the Lamanites, go and send missionaries to the Lamanites, and the Lord sends them to New York and Ohio and Missouri, and then later on Joseph Smith decides to change his mind, isn't he sort of going against his original revelations in that sense?
Well, plus the problems now that Neville's finding, the Joseph Smith finding, the whole times and seasons debacle too. That's major. That is major.
But ultimately, you have to look at two things here, Troy. And this is what I kind of base my thoughts about Joseph Smith and what his thoughts were, because nobody really knows for sure what was going on in Joseph Smith's mind except for Joseph Smith, right?
Right.
So there's only two ways you can know. Number one is what he said, and even more importantly, what he did. Okay, because one's actions show what your true thoughts are more than what you say your thoughts are, right?
Right.
Okay. So those two things are this. About 1 month before Joseph Smith was assassinated, there's an account in his own personal history, his own journal, okay, where he meets with some chiefs that came over from Keokuk, which is on the other side of the river from Nauvoo. Okay, it's today it's called Keokuk. Okay, it's like there's Montrose and Keokuk over there. Okay, and these chieftains came over to Joseph Smith, and he met with them in his kitchen. And this is actually written up in his own journal. And I could quote it for you. I'd have to pull it up on my computer here. But bottom line, he said, they were asking him about what they should do with some treaties that they were being presented with. And he said, I want you to treat our people like we have treated you, with respect. And see, Joseph Smith, that's one of the things that was different about Joseph Smith and many people of his day, is that when these so-called intellectuals were coming up with these books calling the Native Americans ignorant savages, Joseph Smith treated them like they were the promised children of God.
Totally the opposite.
Absolutely the opposite of what the United States government was doing and what the general consensus of the people at the time were doing. Yeah, so people try to make the church out of being some kind of racist organization, and it's
no.
They ignore the facts of the Joseph Smith and what he was trying to do with trying to restore the history of these people back to themselves through the Book of Mormon, right? And showing that they are the covenant people of God is who these people are. Okay, and Joseph Smith was absolutely convinced. Well, not just convinced, but he sent out missionaries over and over again to go to the Lamanites and the American agents, the Indian agents, the government agents of the Indians would kick the missionaries off. They wouldn't let them preach to the Native Americans. They would keep kicking them off, and Joseph Smith would send them right back in again. They'd kick them back out again, and this was going on in that time frame. But ultimately, what was Joseph Smith's thought? There's a couple of articles that were written by some wonderful church historians as well, talking about Joseph Smith and the Red Man, and how he was completely not just enamored with, but he he was dedicated to the idea of getting the Book of Mormon to these people. And he specifically said, because the Book of Mormon is their history, right? And he has these Native Americans in his house, in his kitchen, and he tells them that the Book of Mormon is the history of their ancestors.
Yeah.
Now, who are the ancestors of the Native Americans? Genetically, the ancestors of the Native Americans in the area that Joseph Smith was in, that he was meeting with these Keokuk, with Chief Keokuk and some of these other chiefs, their DNA links them directly back to the Hopewell mound builder people.
Amazing. That's neat.
So when they sequence the DNA from the remains of the Hopewell, they are the ancestral people to the Native Americans who are there today, and Joseph Smith nailed it. Okay, Joseph Smith never changed his mind. There is no evidence that Joseph Smith ever changed his mind about that. If you go to a month before his death, he was still telling the Native Americans in North America that they are the people that are described in the Book of Mormon. And then finally, when I talked about the that's a historical document. It's right in his personal journals, okay, about this. But ultimately, you have to look at what was Joseph Smith's actions. When he was told by the Lord to send missionaries to the Lamanites, he sent them to New York and Ohio and Missouri. He never sent a single missionary down to Central or South America or Guatemala or Southern Mexico. That didn't happen for 117 years later, before the first missionaries entered into Guatemala. And
at the same time, he's sending people to Europe.
It's just absolutely fascinating, to see what's going on with that. And anyway, so I hope that people will take the opportunity to read Jonathan Neville's book. Again, it's called The Lost City of Zarahemla. He's got several other books out that are just phenomenal books as well. If you haven't got a copy of the Annotated Book of Mormon, it's a little quick little plug here for the Annotated Book of Mormon, which is coming up this next year is Book of Mormon study year. And if you haven't got a copy of that, you can go to our website at bookofmormonevidence.org and get yourself a copy of that. It's the most advanced edition of the Book of Mormon that's ever been published. It's got the words of Christ are already in red for you, so it's like a cheat sheet version. You can go through and just read all the red stuff, and it's Christ speaking or God. When you have angels or Isaiah or other prophets speaking, it's in blue. It's the text has been reformatted, so when you have direct quotes, it's actually indented and put into quotation marks. It's the original text of the Book of Mormon, but it's been redone so that it reads more like actually a regular English book would read. It's got over 260 pages of details and what we call insights pages, which are just fabulous. It makes the Book of Mormon literally come alive. And instead of having illustrations about different places and things, we have photographs of actual artifacts and real places. It's all described within the text of the Book of Mormon, basically. And if you haven't seen it, you can go to the website, bookofmormonevidence.org, go to the bookstore and pull up. And we have there's I think 40 or 50 pages that you can actually just pull down and read how it works and so forth. By far it's the number one best-selling edition of the Book of Mormon. That's today, and you can get them at Deseret Book as well. They're just less expensive on our website. So,
well, we're gonna leave all. Okay, yeah. So Jonathan Neville's gonna be coming back a lot. I would love to have you back again in the future if that's okay. We're gonna leave all the links to Rod Meldrum's whatever he is wanting you to link to will be in the description section, brothers and sisters, of this very video.
I really appreciate the opportunity to come and to talk with you and have this discussion. I think it's high time that this discussion becomes more mainstream. I also, if this is going to come out fairly soon, I want to make a little shout out to one other project. Most of you are probably familiar with the Sound of Freedom.
Oh yeah,
that took America and is taking the world by storm, even right now. But we have a new film. It's the very first ever feature-length epic film involving the Book of Mormon, and it's called The Oath. And in fact, I'm leaving in a couple of days to go down to Beverly Hills to the premiere of this. But it's been done by Darren Southam. He's played Christ in a number of the church's films and so forth. But he's an actor. He's a tremendous actor, and he has a film that is all about it's based on a fictitious little piece of history that's not in the Book of Mormon. Basically, it's not history. It's actually about Moroni, the last Moroni of the Book of Mormon.
Okay.
Living solo, and ended up finding a concubine of a Lamanite king who had been abused and so forth. Anyway, and long story short is he kind of nurses her back to health, and in the process through him teaching her about the differences between his people, the Nephites, and her people, the Lamanites, he unfolds the story of the Book of Mormon to the audience in such a beautiful way. And then
interesting,
and it's a love story. It's an epic film with sword fights and all kinds of stuff going on in there. It's all put in the proper setting of the Book of Mormon in North America.
Almost like
pretty close to the Hill Cumorah.
Like Braveheart type
like
stuff.
A Braveheart kind of thing, yes.
That's so cool.
It's going to be opening in, I think it's about 1,000 theaters across the United States, December the 8th. So get your tickets. You go to The Oath movie, I think it is, or just look up online The Oath, and you can see the trailer for it. But we want to encourage everybody to go out and see this film and make it the next Sound of Freedom, and introduce the world to the Book of Mormon in a way that's never been done before. So we're excited about Darren Southam and his project. Again, it's The Oath movie. You can go check it out beginning in theaters on December 8th.
That's amazing, because I was just thinking not too long ago, I wish some Hollywood producer, not even a member, like I want a non-member to make a Book of Mormon video. I don't know if this guy's a member of the church or not.
Yeah.
But my point is like the Hollywood style type,
Oh man. Yeah, we have Christian Brave Rock. Yeah, we have let's see, Lombard. She played the actors in this film are literally non-LDS mainstream Hollywood incredible actors.
That's so cool.
That is so cool.
Just go and check out the trailer. You're going to see. I mean, they've got these guys that are just massive. These Lamanite warriors are just. I mean, I don't know. They could easily be professional football, linebackers and stuff. I mean, anyway, so if you get a chance to check it out, I am highly recommending it. I've seen it. I've seen different versions of it over the course of the last 3 or 4 years while he's been making it.
That's neat.
Budget, but but just like Sound of Freedom, only I think they did that movie on $14 million. And they ended up with they're over $275 million now.
Right.
It's one of the highest grossing films ever. We'd love to make The Oath a worldwide phenomenon that goes and throughout the world and actually gives a better perspective of the Book of Mormon, especially when you see the part where this concubine of these Lamanite, this Lamanite king, where he teaches her how to read, and she's reading the plates, and she comes to the part where Christ comes to the people, and she turns to him. She said, "He did actually come. He came to our people," and it's really a moving film. It also has to do with protecting the unborn. And all kinds of stuff. It's a movie of valor and courage and strength and defiance against evil, and it's epic. I think you're gonna love it.
I'm already excited about it, and I barely heard about it less than 5 minutes ago. This is amazing. Thank you so much, Rod. Come back. this is only the beginning, folks. All right. Thank you very much.
Right. Thank you. Have a great day.
All right.
You too.
Bye-bye.